The chains rattled first. That sound cut through the noise of 1,000 alien voices, and Mason Cole froze mid-step, his boots stopping on the metal floor of Varric's station like something had grabbed his ankles. He turned his head, slow, careful, the way a man turns when his gut tells him not to look but his eyes go anyway. A girl was kneeling beside a merchant's stall. Her skin was pale as frost, almost glowing under the flickering market lights. Her eyes were silver, wide, locked on him and only him. Around her, hundreds of creatures moved past without a glance. Buyers and sellers of every shape the galaxy could imagine. Tentacled traders, armored warriors, hooded smugglers, whispering deals in 6 different tongues. None of them cared about the girl in chains, but she cared about him. She stared at Mason like he was the only living thing in the entire market. He should have kept walking. He told himself that later, more than once. But something about the way her lips moved, silent, desperate, made his feet stop working, the way feet are supposed to work. "Please," she mouthed. No sound came out, but he read it clear as daylight. "Save me. Take me with you." Mason's chest tightened. He was a cargo trader, nothing more. A man who moved parts and supplies between stations and tried very hard not to get involved in anyone else's trouble. Trouble followed people who got involved. He had learned that the hard way, more than once, in worse markets than this one. He looked away first. He made himself do it. He turned back toward the parts stall, where a Threll trader named Igo Ren was still waiting for him to finish haggling over a crate of hyperdrive coils. "You want them or not, human," Igo said, his 4 eyes blinking out of sync, clearly annoyed at the pause. "Yeah," Mason said, though his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Yeah, I want them." He handed over the credits. He took the crate. He did not look back at the girl in chains, not even once, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to turn around. It didn't work. Nothing about walking away from her worked the way it was supposed to. He carried the crate through the crowded walkways of Varric's station, past stalls selling weapons that hummed with quiet menace, past cages holding creatures he didn't have names for, past hollow screens flashing bounties and warnings, in languages his translator earpiece struggled to keep up with. Varric's was not a place for people with a conscience. It was a place built entirely on the idea that nobody asked questions, and nobody answered them either. Still, her face stayed with him. Silver eyes, pale skin, a voice that never made a sound but somehow reached him anyway. He reached his ship, the Halden Star, docked in Bay 11, its hull scratched and dented from a decade of hard runs across dangerous space. His crew, 4 people he trusted with his life more than he trusted most planets, were already loading supplies. Derek Voss, his oldest friend and second in command, looked up from a supply crate and grinned. "You look like you saw a ghost," Derek said. "Something like that," Mason muttered, setting the crate down harder than he meant to. "Everything all right?" Mason opened his mouth to answer, and that was when the alarms went off across the station. Not ship alarms, market alarms. The kind that meant security forces were moving, fast, through the crowded walkways, weapons drawn, voices barking orders, in a language that needed no translator to understand. Panic. Everyone in the market began to scatter at once. Aliens diving into side corridors, stalls slamming shut, vendors grabbing their goods and running. Mason's first instinct was to get his crew inside and seal the ship. His second instinct, the one that actually won, was to look back toward the market one more time. The chains near the merchant's stall were empty. The girl was gone. His heart pounded harder than it should have for someone who wasn't involved. He told himself that word again. Involved. Like it was a wall he could hide behind. It didn't work this time either. "Mason," Derek called from the loading ramp, his voice sharp now, urgent. "Whatever that is, it's not our problem. We need to get out of here before that security sweep reaches our bay." Mason nodded, though something in him resisted the idea completely. He turned to follow Derek up the ramp, his boots heavy on the metal grating, when a hand grabbed his sleeve from the shadows between 2 supply crates. He spun, fists ready, years of instinct kicking in, before thought could catch up. But the person gripping his sleeve wasn't a threat. It was her, the girl. Up close, she looked even more fragile than she had across the market. Her silver eyes wide with something that went far past fear, something closer to raw desperation. Her clothes were torn at the shoulder, like she had pulled herself free of restraints with more strength than her small frame suggested she should have. "Please," she said, and this time her voice worked. Soft, accented, shaking. "You're human. You're the only human here. Please, take me with you." Mason's mind raced through a dozen reasons to say no. Getting involved with an escaped alien slave in the middle of a security sweep on a lawless station was the kind of decision that ended careers, ended lives, ended everything a cautious trader spent years building. He opened his mouth to refuse. "They will kill me," she whispered, before he could speak. "Not the merchant. Worse than him. Please. I have nowhere else." Something in her voice broke through every wall Mason had built over years of staying out of trouble. Maybe it was the fear in her eyes. Maybe it was the fact that in a market full of 1,000 different species, she had looked for him. Specifically him, like humans meant safety in a galaxy that rarely offered any. Behind them, boots pounded against metal flooring. Closer now, security forces sweeping through the docking bays in organized lines, checking every ship, every crate, every shadow. "Get on board," Mason said, before his brain fully caught up with his mouth. "Now, move." She didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled up the loading ramp ahead of him, disappearing into the shadows of the cargo hold, just as Derek came jogging back down to see what was taking so long. "Mason, what are you doing? We need to—" Derek's words died in his throat as he caught sight of movement in the hold, a pale shape ducking behind a stack of crates. His eyes went wide. Did you just bring an alien fugitive onto my ship?" "Our ship," Mason corrected, already moving past him toward the cockpit. "And yes, explanations later. Right now, we need to get out of this bay before that sweep reaches us." Derek stared at him for a long second, torn between years of friendship and years of hard-learned caution. Then he sighed, the kind of sigh that meant he was going to help even though every instinct told him not to. "You are going to owe me a very long explanation." "Deal," Mason said, already climbing into the pilot's seat. The engines of the Halden Star roared to life, just as security forces rounded the corner into Bay 11, their weapons raised, their voices shouting orders, through speaker systems that echoed against the metal walls. Mason didn't wait to hear what they wanted. He slammed the throttle forward, and the ship lurched out of the docking clamps, tearing free of the station with a violence that rattled every loose bolt in the hull. Behind him, in the cargo hold, the girl pressed herself into the corner between two crates, her knees pulled to her chest, her silver eyes fixed on the small viewport, where the station was already shrinking behind them. For the first time since Mason had seen her chained in the market, something in her expression shifted. Not relief exactly. Not yet. But something close to it. The Halden Star cleared the station's outer ring and shot into open space, stars stretching into thin lines around them as the engines pushed toward full burn. Mason kept his eyes locked on the sensors, waiting, half expecting pursuit ships to appear on the scope at any moment. Nothing came, not yet. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and finally turned in his seat to look back through the open cockpit door toward the cargo hold, where his crew stood in a loose half-circle around the girl, none of them quite sure what to do or say. Derek was the first to speak, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of concern and disbelief. "All right, we're clear of the station. Somebody want to explain what exactly we just did?" Mason unbuckled himself and walked back into the hold, his boots echoing against the metal floor. The girl looked up at him, still curled into the corner, still watching him like he might change his mind at any second and hand her back to whoever had chained her in that market. "Start with your name," Mason said gently, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. She hesitated, her silver eyes flicking between the 4 crew members surrounding her, before settling back on Mason. "Aya," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Aya." "All right, Aya." Mason kept his voice steady, calm, the way he'd learned to talk to frightened people during years of trading in dangerous places. "You're safe for now, but I need to know what we just walked into. Why were you chained up in that market? Who's looking for you?" Ayaya's gaze dropped to the floor, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. For a long moment she said nothing, and the hum of the ship's engines filled the silence between them. "It's a long story," she finally said, "and I do not think you will believe most of it." "Try me," Mason said. "We've got nothing but time between here and the next jump point." Aya lifted her eyes back to his, and something in her expression hardened, like she was steadying herself for whatever came next. "Then I will tell you everything, but you should know, once I do, you cannot go back to your old life, not after what is coming for me." Mason exchanged a glance with Derek, whose face had gone slightly pale at the girl's words. Nobody on the ship spoke for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched endlessly into the dark, and somewhere behind them, unseen but certain, something had already begun to move. "All right," Mason said quietly, settling onto a crate across from her. "Tell me everything." And for the first time since chains had rattled across a crowded market floor, Aya began to speak. Aya wrapped her arms around her knees and stared at the metal floor of the cargo hold for a long moment before she spoke again. The engines of the Halden Star hummed steadily beneath them, carrying the ship deeper into open space, away from Varric Station and whatever had been closing in on that market only minutes before. "My people were called the Kesari," she began, her voice quiet but steady now, like she had rehearsed this story 100 times in her head, waiting for someone willing to listen. "We lived on a world far from any trade routes your kind would know. We kept to ourselves. We never wanted trouble with the rest of the galaxy." "What happened to them?" Mason asked gently. Aya's jaw tightened. "They are gone. All of them. Wiped out in a single night by a faction called the Drazenholt. I do not know if you have heard that name." Derek shook his head slowly. Nora Bell, the ship's engineer, who had been standing near the doorway listening in silence, finally spoke up. "I've heard whispers. Traders talk about them in low voices, usually right before changing the subject. Nobody says much. Nobody wants the wrong ears listening. They are dangerous," Aya said, "and organized. And they wanted something my people had. Something I still carry, whether I wish to or not." Mason leaned forward slightly. "What do they want from you?" Aya hesitated, her silver eyes flicking toward the viewport where stars streaked past in silence. "There is a weapon, ancient, from before even my people understood how to build it. It was buried, sealed, meant never to be used again, but it requires something to activate it. A key, carried in the blood of a single bloodline. My bloodline." The cargo hold went quiet. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade into the background as the crew absorbed what she had just told them. "So you're saying," Derek said slowly, "that you are, in some way, a living key to a weapon powerful enough that an entire faction wiped out a planet just to get their hands on you?" "Yes," Aya said simply. "That is exactly what I am saying." Mason rubbed a hand across his face, trying to process the weight of what he'd just pulled onto his ship. He had expected trouble when he grabbed her hand back on the station. He had not expected this. "How did you end up chained in a market on Varix?" he asked. "If they're hunting you, why would they sell you instead of just taking you?" "They did not sell me," Aya said, bitterness creeping into her voice for the first time. "The merchant who held me was not part of the Drazenholt. He found me hiding on a transport ship 2 months ago and decided I was valuable enough to keep as property, rather than report to anyone. He planned to sell me to the highest bidder, whoever that might be. He did not know what I truly was. He only knew I was worth a great deal of money to someone. And the Drazenholt didn't know where you were," Mason said, understanding beginning to settle over him. "Not until today," Aya said quietly. "The security sweep on the station, that was not station security. Those were Drazenholt agents, disguised, searching every docking bay because someone had finally traced rumors of an unusual captive being held in that market. I do not know how much time we truly had before they found me." Mason felt a chill settle over him despite the warm, recycled air of the cargo hold. If Aya was right, they hadn't escaped a routine security sweep. They had escaped something far more dangerous, and it was only a matter of time before that danger caught up with them. "We need to check the sensors," he said, standing quickly and moving back toward the cockpit. "If they traced you to that market, there's a chance they traced this ship leaving it too." He dropped into the pilot's seat and pulled up the rear sensor display, his eyes scanning the readout with growing unease. For a moment, the scope showed nothing but empty space, and the faint signatures of distant asteroids. Then a new blip appeared, small, distant, but closing steadily on their position. "Derek," Mason called, his voice tight. "Come look at this." Derek leaned over his shoulder, studying the readout. "That's a ship, moving fast, matching our trajectory almost exactly." "Could be nothing," Nora offered from the doorway, though her voice carried little conviction. "Could be," Mason agreed. "But I'm not willing to bet our lives on it." He adjusted their course, angling the Halden star toward a nearby asteroid field visible on the long-range scanners, hoping the dense rock formations might offer some cover if the pursuing ship was indeed hostile. The ship shuddered slightly as it changed heading, and behind him, Mason heard Aya's soft footsteps as she moved closer to the cockpit doorway, watching the sensor display with wide, anxious eyes. "That is them," she said quietly. "I can feel it." "Feel it how?" Mason asked, glancing back at her. "I do not know how to explain it," Aya said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But my people always said the blood remembers danger, even before the mind understands it. Something in me knows they are close." Mason didn't have time to question the strange claim further. The blip on the sensor display grew larger, closer, and a proximity alarm began to chime softly in the cockpit. "They're gaining," Derek said, watching the numbers climb. "Whatever that ship is, it's faster than us." "Then we need every advantage we can get," Mason said, pushing the throttle further forward, guiding the Halden star directly into the asteroid field ahead. Massive chunks of rock, some larger than the ship itself, tumbled slowly through the darkness, catching faint light from a distant star. Navigating through it would be dangerous, but it might be their only chance to lose whoever was on their tail. "Mason, this is reckless," Derek said, gripping the edge of the console as the ship banked sharply to avoid a jagged outcropping of stone. "Reckless keeps us alive," Mason shot back, weaving the ship between two enormous asteroids with barely a few meters of clearance on either side. "Staying in open space with a faster ship behind us gets us caught." Behind them, the pursuing vessel entered the asteroid field as well, its engines glowing bright against the darkness, matching every turn Mason made with unsettling precision. Whoever was flying that ship knew exactly what they were doing. "They're not slowing down," Nora called from the sensor station, alarm creeping into her voice. "If anything, they're gaining faster in here." Mason gritted his teeth and pulled the ship into a steep dive, dropping beneath a cluster of tumbling rocks, the hull groaning under the strain of the sudden maneuver. Warning lights flickered across the console, systems straining to keep up with the abrupt shifts in direction. Aya gripped the doorway of the cockpit, her knuckles white, her silver eyes wide with fear, but also something else, something that looked almost like grim determination. "You need to trust me," she said suddenly. Mason spared her a quick glance. "Trust you with what?" "There is something I can do," she said, her voice steadying, even as the ship rattled around them. "I do not fully understand it myself, but when danger is close, I can sense the paths through it. Let me guide you." It sounded impossible, reckless, exactly the kind of thing Mason would have refused without a second thought under normal circumstances. But circumstances were far from normal, and the pursuing ship was closing the gap with every passing second. "Talk me through it," he said finally, deciding to trust the instinct that had told him to grab her hand back on the station in the first place. Aya moved closer, steadying herself against the back of his seat, her eyes fixed on the asteroid field ahead. "Left," she said suddenly. "Now. Hard left." Mason obeyed without question, banking the ship sharply. A massive asteroid that had been directly in their path tumbled past just meters from the hull, close enough that everyone in the cockpit felt the ship shudder from the near collision. "Down," Aya said next. "Dive beneath the next cluster." Mason pushed the ship into a steep descent, weaving beneath a group of smaller asteroids that clustered together like a loose net of stone. Behind them, the pursuing ship attempted to follow the same maneuver, but clipped the edge of one of the smaller rocks, sending sparks flashing across its hull. "They're falling back," Derek said, disbelief evident in his voice as he watched the sensor readout. "How did you know that path?" "I told you," Aya said quietly, though exhaustion was beginning to creep into her tone. "The blood remembers danger." Mason guided the ship through one more narrow gap between towering rock formations before finally breaking free of the densest part of the asteroid field, the pursuing ship now a distant, fading signature on the sensor scope behind them. "We lost them," Nora said, relief flooding her voice. Or at least, we lost them for now. Mason let out a long breath, easing back on the throttle, as the ship settled into a steadier course through open space once more. He glanced back at Aya, who had sunk against the cockpit wall, her energy visibly drained from whatever she had just done. "That thing you did," he said carefully, "guiding us through there, was that part of what makes you the key thereafter?" Aya nodded slowly, her eyes heavy with fatigue. "It is a small piece of it. My senses are tied to danger in ways your kinds are not. It is useful, but it also comes at a cost. I will need rest soon." Mason studied her for a long moment, weighing everything he had learned in the last hour against the quiet, exhausted girl standing in his cockpit. Whatever she truly was, whatever danger she carried with her, one thing had become clear beyond any doubt. There was no going back now, not for her, and not for him either. "Get some rest," he said finally, nodding toward the small crew quarters down the corridor. "We'll figure out the next move once you've recovered. But Aya, I need you to understand something. If we're doing this, if we're protecting you, I need the full truth. All of it. No more pieces held back." Aya met his gaze, and for the first time since the market, something like trust flickered behind her silver eyes. "You will have it," she said quietly. "I promise you that." As she disappeared down the corridor toward the crew quarters, Mason turned back to the viewport, staring out at the endless stretch of stars ahead. Somewhere behind them, the ship that had chased them through the asteroid field was likely already reporting back to whoever had sent it. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness of space, more of them were surely already on the move. The Halden star pressed onward, carrying its crew and its newest passenger deeper into a galaxy that had just become far more dangerous than any of them had ever imagined. 3 days passed before the next threat found them. 3 days of quiet routine that felt almost strange after the chaos of their escape. Mason kept the Halden star moving along a winding, unpredictable route, avoiding major trade lanes and busy stations, sticking to quiet corners of space where fewer eyes might notice a single cargo ship drifting through the dark. Aya spent much of that time recovering, though she rarely stayed in the crew quarters for long. Mason often found her sitting near the cargo hold viewport, watching the stars pass in silence, her expression unreadable. She spoke little about her past, unless asked directly, but slowly, piece by piece, she began sharing more of who she was and what she had lost. "My mother," she said one evening, sitting across from Mason in the ship's small galley, while the rest of the crew slept. "She is the reason I am alive at all." Mason set down the ration pack he had been eating from, giving her his full attention. "What happened to her?" Aya's fingers traced idle patterns on the metal table between them. "When the Drazenholt came for our world, she knew what they wanted. She knew they would search every house, every family, until they found the bloodline they needed. So she sent me away, alone, on a small transport meant for cargo, not passengers. She stayed behind." "To buy you time," Mason said quietly. Aya nodded, her silver eyes glistening faintly under the dim galley lights. "She died holding them back long enough for my ship to clear the planet's defenses. I did not even get to say goodbye properly. One moment she was there, the next, the transmission from our homeworld went silent forever." Mason didn't know what to say to that. He had lost people before, in dangerous trade routes gone wrong, in deals that turned violent, but nothing that compared to watching an entire world go silent behind him. He reached across the table instead, and placed a hand briefly over hers. A small gesture, but one that seemed to mean something to her in that moment. "You're not alone anymore," he said simply. "Whatever happens next, you've got a ship full of people willing to stand with you now." Aya looked up at him, something shifting behind her expression, gratitude mixed with lingering disbelief that anyone would choose to stand beside her after everything she had already cost them. The peaceful moment didn't last. The next morning, alarms tore through the ship, jolting everyone from sleep. Mason scrambled into the cockpit, Derek right behind him, both men still half-dressed as they dropped into their seats and stared at the sensor display in alarm. 3 ships, closing fast from 2 directions, cutting off any easy retreat. "They found us," Derek said, disbelief and fear mixing in his voice. "How? We've barely used any major routes since we left Varix." Mason's mind raced, trying to piece together how 3 hostile ships had managed to intercept their carefully chosen path through empty space. Then his gaze landed on Aya, standing frozen in the cockpit doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked disturbingly like recognition. "Aya," he said carefully, "do you know those ships?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely steady. "The lead ship, I recognize its signature. That is Cade Osric. He is a bounty hunter the Drazenholt use when they want results without leaving obvious traces back to themselves. He is very good at finding people who do not want to be found." "Great," Derek muttered, already pulling up weapons systems, though the Halden Star carried little in the way of actual firepower, mostly defensive countermeasures, meant for scaring off pirates, not fighting professional hunters. "We can't outrun 3 ships in open space," Mason said, studying the sensor display grimly. "Not without somewhere to hide." "There," Nora called from her station, pointing toward a reading on the long-range scanner. "Debris field, about 200,000 kilometers ahead. Remains of some old station. Looks like it's been abandoned for years. Could give us cover." "It's our best shot," Mason said, already adjusting course. "Everyone hold on." The Halden Star surged forward, engines straining, as Mason pushed them toward the debris field, the 3 pursuing ships, closing in from behind, with terrifying speed. Weapons fire erupted moments later, bright bursts of energy streaking past the hull, close enough to rattle the entire ship with each near miss. "They're not trying to destroy us," Aya said suddenly, gripping the back of Mason's seat as the ship lurched violently to one side. "They are trying to disable us. They need me alive." "That's somehow not making me feel better," Derek shot back, gripping his console tightly, as another blast grazed dangerously close to their rear thrusters. The debris field appeared ahead of them, a scattered mess of twisted metal, broken hull sections, and drifting cargo containers, remnants of some catastrophe long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. Mason guided the Halden Star directly into the wreckage, weaving between larger sections of debris, hoping the chaotic terrain might slow their pursuers even slightly. It worked, briefly. 2 of the 3 pursuing ships hesitated at the edge of the debris field, wary of navigating through such dense wreckage at high speed. But the lead ship, the one Aya had identified as belonging to Cade Osric, plunged in without hesitation, closing the distance with unsettling precision. "He's not slowing down," Nora warned, watching the sensor readout with growing alarm. "He's better at this than we are." Mason's jaw tightened as he weaved the ship through another narrow gap between twisted metal beams, the hull scraping audibly against a jagged piece of debris. Warning lights flared across the console, and somewhere below deck, a hull breach alarm began chiming softly, indicating minor damage from the collision. "We need another plan," Derek said urgently. "We can't keep dodging forever," and he's gaining. Aya's eyes suddenly widened, fixed on something ahead through the viewport. "There," she said, pointing toward a massive, partially intact section of what looked like an old station core, floating amid the wreckage. "If we can get inside that structure, the metal is dense enough to block most scanning systems. He will lose our exact position." Mason didn't hesitate, guiding the ship toward the massive structure, threading through a jagged opening in its side that looked barely large enough to accommodate their hull. The Halden Star scraped through with only meters to spare on either side, the sound of metal grinding against metal, echoing painfully through the ship, before they finally broke through into a wide, dark interior chamber. Mason cut the engines immediately, dropping the ship into a slow drift, powering down every non-essential system to minimize their signature. The cockpit fell into tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of life support and the rapid breathing of everyone aboard. Outside, through the jagged opening they had entered, they could see Cade Osric's ship slow at the edge of the wreckage, its sensors clearly sweeping the area, searching for any trace of their location. Long minutes passed in agonizing silence as the hunter's ship drifted closer, then further, scanning the debris field methodically. "He knows we're in here somewhere," Aya whispered, her voice barely audible. "He will not give up easily." As if to confirm her words, Cade Osric's ship began firing short bursts of energy, into random sections of the debris field, an old hunter's trick meant to flush out hidden prey through fear alone. Each impact sent tremors through the wreckage around them, and Mason gripped the edge of his console tightly, praying silently that their position remained hidden. After nearly 20 agonizing minutes, the hunter's ship finally turned away, joining the other two pursuers as they regrouped at the edge of the debris field before eventually retreating into open space, apparently deciding the search had grown too costly to continue. Only once their sensors confirmed all three ships had truly left did Mason finally allow himself to breathe again. "That was too close," Derek said, slumping back in his seat, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. "We can't keep running like this indefinitely. Eventually our luck runs out." Mason turned to look at Aya, who stood quietly near the cockpit doorway, her expression a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "We need a real plan," he said. "Not just running from place to place hoping we stay ahead of them. Is there anywhere safe? Anyone who might actually be able to help us deal with the Drazenholt directly, instead of just avoiding them forever?" Aya considered the question carefully before answering. "There is a place. A hidden colony, built by survivors from worlds the Drazenholt destroyed. They call it Aldervane. It is protected by old technology, hidden from most scanning systems. If we can reach it, we would be safe, at least for a time, and they may know more about stopping the Drazenholt permanently than I do alone." "Do you know how to get there?" Mason asked. "I know the general direction," Aya said. "My mother told me, before she sent me away, in case I ever needed somewhere safe to run. I never thought I would actually need it." Mason exchanged a glance with Derek, who gave a slow, reluctant nod. Whatever risks lay ahead, staying on the run indefinitely clearly wasn't sustainable, not with hunters as skilled as Cade Osric on their trail. "All right," Mason said finally, turning back to the controls and beginning to carefully navigate the ship back out through the wreckage. "Set a course. Aldervane it is." As the Halden Star eased free of the debris field and back into open space, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that their narrow escape had bought them only a temporary reprieve. Somewhere out there, Cade Osric would already be reporting their evasion back to whoever commanded him, and the Drazenholt would not simply give up the search for something as valuable as Aya. But for now, they had a destination, a direction, and a fragile thread of hope to follow through the darkness ahead. The journey toward Aldervane took nearly a week, winding through quiet, unmarked routes far from any major trade lanes. During that time, an uneasy tension settled over the crew of the Halden Star, a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and the constant awareness that danger could reappear at any moment. Mason kept watch over the sensors more than he slept, and Aya, though she tried to hide it, grew increasingly restless the closer they came to their destination. It was Derek who finally voiced what had clearly been building beneath the surface for days. Mason found him alone in the ship's small storage bay one evening, sitting on a crate, staring at nothing in particular, his expression troubled. "You all right?" Mason asked, leaning against the doorway. Derek looked up, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes that Mason couldn't quite place. "Honestly, no. I've been thinking about everything that's happened since Varix, and I keep coming back to the same question. Are we sure about this, Mason? Really sure?" "Sure about what exactly?" "About her," Derek said, lowering his voice, even though Aya was resting in the crew quarters several corridors away. "About risking everything, the ship, the crew, our lives, for someone we barely know. I get that she's in danger. I get that what happened to her is horrible. But we're not soldiers, Mason. We're traders. We deal in cargo, not galactic conflicts with factions powerful enough to wipe out entire worlds." Mason crossed his arms, considering his old friend's words carefully. "You think we should have left her back on Varix?" "I think," Derek said slowly, "that we're in over our heads, and I'm scared that by the time we realize it, it'll be too late to turn back." Mason didn't have an easy answer for that. Part of him understood exactly where Derek's fear came from. They had walked into something far bigger than either of them had anticipated, and there was no guarantee it would end well for any of them. But another part of him, the part that had reached for Aya's hand back in that market without fully understanding why, refused to accept the idea of turning back now. "I don't think we can undo this," Mason said finally, "even if we wanted to. We're already involved, Derek. The Drazenholt know this ship now. Walking away from Aya doesn't make that danger disappear. It just means we abandoned her for nothing. Derek studied him for a long moment before finally nodding, though the worry never fully left his expression. Just promise me something. If it comes down to a choice between finishing this and keeping the crew alive, you'll choose the crew. Mason hesitated, longer than he probably should have, and something in that hesitation clearly did not sit well with Derek, though neither of them addressed it directly in that moment. The tension didn't fade over the following days. If anything, it deepened, until it finally broke apart entirely during their final approach toward Aldervane's hidden coordinates. They were passing through a quiet stretch of space, less than a day from their destination, when the sensors picked up an unexpected contact, a single ship approaching from an unusual angle, moving with the deliberate precision of a vessel that knew exactly where to look. "That's not a coincidence," Nora said grimly, watching the readout. "Nobody just happens to be out here." Mason's stomach sank as the ship's identification signature resolved on their display. Cade Osric's ship, alone this time, but no less dangerous for it. "How?" Mason breathed, disbelief mixing with dread. "We lost him days ago. We've barely used any traceable routes since." Aya's face had gone pale, her silver eyes wide with something that looked disturbingly like guilt. "There is only one way he could have found us this precisely," she said quietly. "Someone told him our heading." The cockpit fell into heavy silence as every eye turned toward Derek, who stood near the back of the room, his expression suddenly tight with something that looked uncomfortably close to guilt. "Derek," Mason said slowly, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Tell me you didn't." Derek's jaw clenched, and for a long, painful moment, he said nothing at all. Then, finally, the truth came out, halting and reluctant. "I sent a message 3 days ago. Just a short one, to an old contact who sometimes deals with bounty postings. I told him we might have information about a valuable fugitive, nothing specific, no names, no location. I thought maybe there was a way to make this whole situation profitable, instead of just dangerous, or at the very least, find a safer way out of it for all of us." "You sold us out," Mason said, disbelief and anger cutting sharply through his voice. "I was trying to protect the crew," Derek shot back, though guilt clearly weighed heavy in every word. "I never meant for him to actually track us down like this. I thought it would just be a quiet inquiry, nothing more." Before the argument could continue, the ship shuddered violently as weapons fire struck the outer hull, jolting everyone off balance. Cade Osric's ship had closed the distance far faster than any of them had anticipated, clearly having anticipated their exact heading thanks to Derek's careless message. "We need to move! Now!" Mason snapped, dropping into the pilot's seat and slamming the throttle forward. The Halden Star lurched into a sharp evasive turn as another blast of weapons fire streaked past, narrowly missing their rear thrusters. "I'm sorry," Derek said, moving quickly to his station despite the tension still hanging thick in the air. "Whatever you need from me right now, I'll do it. Just let me help fix this." Mason didn't have time to process the betrayal fully, not with a skilled hunter's ship closing in fast and weapons fire rattling the hull with each passing second. "Divert power to the rear shields," he ordered, his voice tight with focus. "Nora, I need evasive calculations. Now." The chase that followed was unlike anything they had faced before. Cade Osric flew with ruthless precision, anticipating nearly every maneuver Mason attempted, closing the gap steadily despite every evasive tactic the Halden Star's aging engines could manage. "He's going to catch us," Nora said, panic creeping into her voice, as another blast grazed dangerously close to the hull. "We can't outmaneuver him." Aya, who had been gripping the back of Mason's seat throughout the chase, suddenly straightened, her silver eyes narrowing with fierce determination. "Then we stop running," she said. "Bring me to the ventral airlock." "What? Why?" Mason asked, even as he fought to keep the ship steady under continued fire. "I told you before," Aya said, already moving toward the corridor. "There is more to what I am than simply a key. My people were not only carriers of the weapon, we carried defenses too, meant to protect the key itself when threatened. I have never had to use it before, not truly, but I believe I can now." Mason hesitated only a moment before nodding toward Derek. "Go with her. Whatever she needs, help her." Derek didn't argue, following Aya quickly toward the ventral section of the ship, clearly desperate for a chance to make up for his earlier mistake. Moments later, Mason watched through the cockpit's rear camera feed as a strange, shimmering distortion began to build around the Halden star's hull, faint at first, then growing steadily brighter, radiating outward from somewhere near the ventral airlock. Cade Osric's ship, closing in for what looked like a final disabling shot, suddenly veered off course as the distortion expanded outward in a rippling wave, sweeping across his vessel's systems. Sparks flashed visibly across his ship's hull, and its weapons systems fell silent, as the strange energy disrupted something critical within his onboard technology. "What just happened?" Nora asked, staring in disbelief at the sensor readout showing Cade Osric's ship drifting, powerless, tumbling slowly away from them. Aya's voice came weakly over the ship's internal comm, exhaustion evident in every word. "A resonance pulse. It disables technology within a certain range. I did not know if it would truly work. I have never attempted it under real danger before." Mason immediately adjusted course, pulling the Halden star away from the drifting hunter's ship, putting as much distance as possible between them, while Cade Osric's systems remained disabled. "Get back up here," he called toward the ventral section. "Both of you, now, before he recovers." Minutes later, Derek half-carried an exhausted Aya back into the cockpit, her legs barely able to support her own weight, her silver eyes heavy with fatigue from whatever she had just done. Mason guided the ship into a tight, evasive course, weaving through a nearby debris cluster to further obscure their trail, before finally setting a direct heading toward Aldervane's hidden coordinates. Once they were confident no immediate pursuit remained, Mason turned in his seat to look at Derek, who stood quietly near the cockpit doorway, guilt still etched deeply into his expression. "We'll talk about what you did," Mason said finally, his voice tired, but no longer sharp with anger. "But not right now. Right now, I need you focused on getting us the rest of the way to Aldervane safely. Can I trust you for that much at least?" Derek nodded firmly, determination replacing some of the guilt in his eyes. "Yes. Whatever it takes, I'll make this right." Mason held his gaze a moment longer before finally turning back to the controls, guiding the battered but intact Halden star deeper into the quiet darkness of space, carrying its exhausted, fragile passenger one step closer to whatever safety Aldervane might actually offer them. Behind them, Cade Osric's disabled ship drifted silently amid the stars, a temporary victory in a fight that all of them understood was far from truly over. Aldervane appeared on the sensors first, as nothing more than a faint anomaly, a strange gravitational ripple hidden within an otherwise empty stretch of space. Mason guided the ship carefully toward the coordinates Aya had given him, watching in quiet amazement as the anomaly resolved into something far more remarkable, a massive hidden colony, built into the hollowed core of a drifting asteroid, its structures glowing faintly with soft, warm light against the endless black of space around it. "I did not expect it to be this large," Ayu admitted quietly, standing beside Mason in the cockpit, her strength slowly returning after days of rest following the encounter with Cade Osric. "How many people live here?" Mason asked, guiding the ship carefully toward a docking entrance that had opened along the asteroid's surface, clearly detecting their approach. "Thousands, I believe," Aya said, "survivors from many worlds the Drazenholt destroyed over the years. My mother told me stories of this place when I was young, though I never imagined I would actually see it myself." The Halden star eased into the docking bay, guided by automated systems that clearly recognized something about their approach, perhaps some signal built into Aya's presence itself. As the ship settled into its berth and the engines powered down, Mason felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering caution settle over him. They had made it, but he understood well enough by now that safety in this journey was rarely permanent. A small group waited near the docking entrance as the crew disembarked, led by an older woman with silver-streaked hair and sharp, watchful eyes that studied each of them carefully before settling on Aya with clear recognition. "You carry the Kasari bloodline," the woman said, her voice steady, measured. "I did not think any of your line remained, after what happened to your world. My mother sent me away before the end," Aya said quietly. "She told me of this place, in case I ever needed refuge." The woman's expression softened slightly, though sorrow remained clear in her eyes. Your mother was a brave woman. I met her once, many years ago, before the Drazenholt grew as powerful as they are now. Come, all of you. You are safe here, for now, but there is much we should discuss. They were led deeper into the colony, through winding corridors carved from ancient stone, past communities of refugees from a dozen different worlds, all bound together by shared loss and shared determination to survive against the same enemy. Mason found himself watching Aya throughout the walk, noting the way her posture gradually relaxed, the tension in her shoulders easing bit by bit as she took in the sight of a community built entirely around protecting people exactly like her. They were brought eventually to a quiet chamber where the woman, who introduced herself as Elder Marin Voss, no relation to Derek despite the shared surname, offered them seats around a simple wooden table. "Tell me everything," Elder Marin said, addressing Aya directly. "From the beginning." "I need to understand exactly what the Drazenholt know, and how close they came to capturing you." Aya recounted the story slowly, from her escape aboard the cargo transport, through the years spent hiding on distant stations, to her capture by the merchant on Varix, and finally to Mason's decision to help her escape. She spoke of Cade Osric's pursuit, of the debris field, of Derek's mistake, and the resonance pulse she had used to disable the hunter's ship. Throughout the telling, Elder Marin listened in careful silence, her expression growing increasingly grave. "This is troubling," she said finally, once Aya had finished. "If the Drazenholt were able to trace you as far as they did, even after your escape from Varix, it means their search has grown far more sophisticated than we previously believed. They will not stop searching, not for something as valuable as you represent to their plans. Is there a way to stop them?" Mason asked. "Permanently, I mean, not just running and hiding forever." Elder Marin considered the question carefully before answering. "There may be. The weapon the Drazenholt seek to activate, the one tied to Aya's bloodline, was sealed away by the ancient Kasari for good reason. It was never meant to be a tool of conquest. If Aya were willing, and if she trusted us enough, there may be a way to destroy the weapon entirely, removing the reason the Drazenholt hunt her in the first place." Aya's expression tightened with uncertainty. "Destroy it? Is that even possible?" "Difficult, yes. Dangerous, certainly. But possible," Elder Marin said. "It would require traveling to the location where the weapon remains sealed, a journey that carries significant risk, especially now that the Drazenholt search for you so aggressively. But if successful, it would end their pursuit permanently. There would be nothing left for them to gain by capturing you." The chamber fell into thoughtful silence, as everyone considered the weight of what Elder Marin had proposed. Mason glanced toward Aya, watching the conflict clearly playing out behind her silver eyes, fear mixed with a fragile, cautious hope. "I want to do it," Aya said finally, her voice steadying with quiet resolve. "I am tired of running. I am tired of being hunted for something I never asked to carry. If there is a way to end this, truly end it, I want to try." Mason felt a swell of respect for her in that moment, watching the frightened girl from the market transform, slowly but surely, into someone determined to reclaim control over her own fate, rather than simply surviving one crisis after another. "Then we'll help you," Mason said firmly, "all the way through, whatever it takes." Derek, who had remained mostly quiet since their arrival at Aldervane, finally spoke up as well, his voice carrying a renewed sense of determination. "After everything that's happened, after my mistake nearly got us all captured, I want to make this right. Whatever this journey requires, I'm with you both, completely." Elder Marin studied the resolve on each of their faces, before finally nodding slowly. "Then I will provide what guidance and support Aldervane can offer. The location of the sealed weapon lies within a dangerous region of space, heavily guarded by ancient defenses left behind by the Kasari themselves, meant to prevent exactly the kind of misuse the Drazenholt now seek. It will not be an easy journey." "When has anything about this journey been easy?" Mason said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face, despite the seriousness of the moment. Over the following days, the crew of the Halden Star prepared carefully for the journey ahead, guided by information and resources provided by Aldervane's community. Aya spent long hours with Elder Marin and other surviving Kasari refugees, learning more about her own abilities, the history of her people, and the specific dangers that awaited them at the weapons-sealed location. Mason found himself growing steadily closer to her throughout this time, their conversations shifting gradually from cautious explanations of danger toward quieter, more personal moments. Shared meals in the colony's communal hall, quiet walks through Aldervane's winding corridors, moments where the weight of everything hunting them seemed to fade, if only briefly, into the background. "Can I ask you something?" Aya said one evening, as they sat together near a wide viewport overlooking the stars beyond Aldervane's protective structure. "Of course," Mason said. "Why did you help me? That day in the market, you did not know me. You owed me nothing." Most people in that crowd looked away without a second thought. Mason considered the question carefully before answering. "Honestly, I've asked myself that same thing more than once since then. I think, in that moment, I just couldn't convince myself to be one of the people who looked away. Something about the way you looked at me, like I was the only chance you had left. I couldn't walk past that, no matter how much safer it might have been to try." Aya studied him quietly for a long moment, something warm and grateful flickering behind her silver eyes. "I am glad you did not walk away," she said softly. "Whatever happens next, whatever danger still waits for us, I do not think I could have survived this long without you standing beside me." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Mason said. "I've watched you these past weeks. You've faced things that would break most people, and you're still standing, still fighting. That's not something I gave you. That was always in you." The moment stretched between them, quiet and warm, before Aya finally spoke again, her voice softer than before. "Whatever we find at the end of this journey, whether we succeed in destroying the weapon or not, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. You gave me something I thought I had lost forever, the chance to hope for a future beyond simply surviving one danger after another." Mason reached over, taking her hand gently in his. "Then let's go find that future, together." 3 days later, the Halden Star departed Aldervane, its crew rested, resupplied, and armed with knowledge and guidance that would carry them toward the final, dangerous chapter of their journey. Elder Marin and the community of Aldervane watched them go, offering quiet blessings and hopeful farewells, though everyone understood the danger that still lay ahead was far from resolved. As the ship cleared the hidden colony's protective boundary and pushed forward into open space, Mason glanced toward Aya, standing beside him in the cockpit, her expression calm, despite the uncertain path ahead. "Ready for this?" he asked. "No," Aya admitted honestly, a faint, determined smile crossing her face. "But I am ready to try anyway. With you beside me, I believe we have a chance." Behind them, the stars of Aldervane faded slowly into the vast darkness of space, and ahead, an uncertain future stretched onward, filled with danger, but also, for the first time since chains had rattled across a crowded market floor, filled with genuine hope as well. The Halden Star pressed forward into the unknown, carrying its crew and its precious, hard-won passenger toward whatever destiny awaited them among the stars, bound together now not by chance, but by choice, and by the quiet, unbreakable resolve to face whatever came next, side by side.